Welcome to The Explainer, where we dig into the complex stories behind the headlines. Today, we're looking at something pretty alarming, a whole series of devastating fires at oil refineries all over the planet. We're going to ask what's causing them and, more importantly, what it means for all of us. So let's start this story in India. Picture this. It's April, and a brand new, totally state-of-the-art oil refinery is all set for its big debut. The Prime Minister himself is supposed to be there. This thing was a huge deal, a symbol of national pride and a massive step forward for the country's energy security. But then, literally 24 hours before the ribbon-cutting ceremony, bam, a huge explosion rips right through its most critical component, the crude distillation unit. And look, this isn't just some random pipe. We're talking about the absolute heart of the entire operation. It's where the whole refining process begins. Now, officials on the ground suspected a hydrocarbon leak was the cause. A tragic accident, right? But what if it wasn't? What if this was just one piece of a much larger and, frankly, much more disturbing global story? Let's dig into what's been happening. Yeah, because that refinery in India, it was far from an isolated case. Not even close. In just a few short weeks, it felt like refineries everywhere started going up in flames. It's a pattern that's just, well, it's happening too fast and in too many places to be a coincidence. And when you start to map it out, the pattern is genuinely alarming. We're not just talking about one region. We are seeing these incidents pop up across multiple continents, hitting some of the most critical energy-producing nations in the world, from the U.S. Gulf Coast all the way to the Middle East and Asia. I mean, just look at this timeline of chaos. You've got a major facility getting hit in Port Arthur, Texas. Key refineries in Saudi Arabia and the UAE are struck by drones. A fire breaks out at one of only 2 refineries in all of Australia, triggering a mad scramble for fuel. You have massive blazes shutting down state-run facilities in Mexico and Ecuador, and critical plants exploding in Romania and Iraq. Now, some of these were officially called accidents, others were confirmed attacks, but no matter the cause, they all share one crucial and devastating thing in common. They're hitting the very engine rooms of our world. Think about it. These are the places that turn raw crude oil into everything that makes our society function. The diesel for the trucks that deliver our food, the gasoline for our cars, and the jet fuel for the planes that connect our entire planet. They are absolutely essential. So that brings us to the big question, right? Who or what is behind all of this? Is it just the worst string of bad luck in history, or is something much more deliberate going on? Well, the evidence we have seems to point toward a more calculated strategy. It seems like we're seeing 2 kinds of attacks play out. Some are totally out in the open. Ukraine, for instance, has been very public about striking Russian refinery infrastructure as part of its war effort. No secret there. But then you have the other incidents, the ones claimed through much more shadowy channels, like when Iranian-backed channels allegedly took credit for the explosion in Port Arthur, Texas, calling it straight-up sabotage. Now, this is where it gets really intense. The source material for this explainer makes a pretty explosive claim. And just to be crystal clear, this is an unverified allegation. It claims that the UK has been providing the precise targeting data, the telemetry needed to carry out these attacks on Russian energy facilities, and maybe even the munitions themselves. If that were true, we're not just talking about isolated incidents anymore. We're talking about a covert shadow war aimed right at the global energy system. And this is why all of this is so incredibly critical right now. See, these fires aren't happening in a stable market. They're happening inside a system that was already stretched to its absolute limit thanks to a huge surge in demand after the pandemic and years of not investing enough in new refineries. There's just no slack in the system. The immediate impact is just staggering. In Asia alone, refineries are cutting back so much that the output of diesel and jet fuel has already dropped by at least 1 million barrels. Every single day. That is a massive, massive hole in the global fuel supply. And this chart here, this perfectly illustrates the crisis that's unfolding in the travel industry. You're looking at plummeting jet fuel supplies across key global regions. It's gotten so bad that the chief of the International Energy Agency is warning that Europe could have just weeks of jet fuel left. That's exactly why major airlines are already canceling thousands and thousands of flights. Okay, so here's the really crucial point to understand. This isn't just an oil crisis. It's hitting multiple essential supply chains all at once. Yeah, it's jet fuel for planes and diesel for trucks, but natural gas, which gets processed right alongside crude oil, is the main ingredient for ammonia-based fertilizers. So less processing means less fertilizer, which directly hammers our food supply. And it also hits the supply of helium, which is also extracted from natural gas. And that's essential for making the computer chips that run our entire digital world. So just as the world's physical energy supply is becoming dangerously fragile, a new and maybe even more vulnerable frontline is emerging out of the shadows. Let's look at what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical choke points for global oil transport. Iran has effectively blockaded it. They've said it's going to stay closed until $100 billion in frozen assets are released, a demand that, let's be honest, is highly unlikely to be met. So this move is choking off a major artery of the world's energy supply, and there is no clear end in sight. And now it looks like the conflict might be pivoting away from the physical world of oil tankers and into an entirely different digital domain. Not long ago, Iran published this map, highlighting the undersea internet cables that run through the very same volatile area. A staggering 97% of all global internet traffic, we're talking your bank transactions, your communications, the data that powers our economies, it all rides on these few, very vulnerable cables. This is a subtle but unmistakable threat. And that brings us to a final and pretty provocative question. As our physical supply chains for fuel and for food become more and more fragile, what happens to our deeply interconnected world if the digital infrastructure that underpins everything suddenly goes dark too?